Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back once again to another episode of College Football Pros. I am your host, as always, Nicholas Valinchak, and I am joined by Drew, and we're excited to get this week started off right. We're going to talk about the Big 12. Drew, what do you think of the Big 12 in 2015?
I think it's an interesting conference. I mean, you look top to bottom, and you have, the former powerhouses of Texas and Oklahoma, and you look at the new powerhouses of Baylor and TCU. So those four teams are as good as anybody in the nation, could be or should be. So I think this is a fun conference, ton of points, no defense, ton of points. So should be fun.
So I think one good place to start before we go into the analysis and breaking down teams and looking at what players and positions we really like this year is to kind of look at the Big 12 as part of the Power 5, but ultimately being left out of the college football playoffs last year. It was a very odd scenario because TCU entered into the championship week in third. I didn't really think that there was going to be a situation that was going to knock them out of it. Ultimately, that ended up being what happened. And then to kind of put a little more of a question mark behind the whole process and the whole mindset going on in the Big 12, I believe it was the commissioner at their media day said he doesn't believe at all that the Big 12 having a playoff or a conference championship, rather, would have had any effect on how the college football playoff committee would have voted. And I've got to really highly question that mentality because, number one, you don't think we would have loved to see another Baylor TCU game. I think we obviously would have. And number two, how could you mentally repress the idea that the entire reason they weren't voted in was because there was no playoff system?
Yeah, I mean, you have to have a conference title game. I mean, you can't go through a whole season and then at the end of the season you go, oh, we're just going to leave it alone and whatever happens, happens. Like every other conference in the nation has a conference title game. All the ones that matter, all the ones that are, vying for national championships have conference title games. So, did they make a mistake by letting some teams go to other conferences? Sure. Did they make a mistake by putting all their money maybe in the Longhorn Network and therefore not allowing other teams to come in? Is it the money? Is it geographic? I can't answer that, but I think it's an asinine comment to say we don't need a conference title game when literally that specific reason is what kept you out of the college football playoff. I don't think either Baylor or TCU should have got in. I really don't. And I'm okay with Ohio State getting in. Obviously they won it all, but at the time I had zero issue with it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm coming from a perspective totally different than yours, where I felt that as a whole, I think, to me, TCU played a much better season than Ohio State up to that point. That's just my personal opinion. I mean, their loss was definitely a much better loss than Ohio State. You can look at Ohio State and say ultimately they had a tougher strength of schedule in terms of their non-conference games, and I'm not going to necessarily argue that fact so much. I just feel like Ohio State had more nail-biters or more close calls at the end of the day than TCU had. But ultimately what it comes down to is the absence of that game to give a TCU or a Baylor the stage to perform on and to show that they were the final bottom line, no questions asked, champion of their conference. Not having that did ultimately affect, and I'm sure if you were to go on to the internet and look at Google, I'm sure you're going to find situations where people involved with the game have mentioned that over the last 8 months, that not having that definitely did put the committee in a position where they had to look to the conferences that had the conference title games, and they're going to have to do something here. They can't. There's no way. If they keep this pace, they're basically going to have someone in that conference that has one less loss than a team from every other conference just to almost be in the thought process to be in the college football playoffs.
Yeah, and to circle back on what you said earlier about, TCU and Ohio State, I just want to touch on one thing. What is the one thing that I have been preaching pretty much since this podcast started on scheduling, and who should we not schedule?
I mean, the only thing I've heard you say since we started this podcast is Johnny Dixon. I think you say him at least 47 times every episode. But
I
generally speaking, and we talked about this last week, was the fact that you shouldn't be scheduling against FCS opponents.
Okay, and just to illustrate that point, TCU played Samford, not Stanford, Samford, to open the season last year, won 48-14, and Ohio State played all 4 out-of-conference Division I opponents. At the end of the day, if I'm looking at resumes and I'm going, okay, Ohio State lost to Virginia Tech, okay, that's not a very good loss. Okay, TCU lost to Baylor. Okay, that's a decent loss. Let's look at schedules. Okay, they beat Samford, and Ohio State beat a bunch of D1 teams. To me, that's what it comes down to. That's the deal breaker. I mean, I'm putting Ohio State over TCU every single day.
I get your perspective, and it's something we're not going to see eye to eye on, and that's fine. I think that's one of the beautiful things about having this podcast and the dynamic that's going to exist in the playoff voting system is there's going to be people that look like you do and say, this is a football team who plays no FCS opponents. They play you can't say tough because we know what Ohio State's non-conference schedule looks like this year, and we still.
Do you want to look at TCU's?
Oh, I'm not. That wasn't part of the argument. Part of the argument was they have a laughable non-conference. I guess what I'm saying, if both non-conference schedules are laughable, and you're immediately putting 4 W's, in the non-conference games, how much of a relevance is it whether if it's FCS or FBS? I know that there is definitely a better talent in 90% of the FBS teams. I don't know what Samford's like. I mean, it's not even really a relevant part of the argument to me. To me, it just came down to they both lost one game. Ohio State lost on their home turf to a team that I didn't think was very good. TCU lost to the team that ended up, I think, somewhere between 6 and 8 in the final rankings. I can't. I'm fine with Ohio State making it. Ohio State proved that they wanted it more. They're the national champions. They can hold their head up high. I have no problem with that whatsoever. But I'm saying, had there been a conference championship game, it could have swayed enough people like me in that committee who would say, okay, I'm more comfortable with the team that lost to a much, much, much higher ranked opponent. I think Virginia Tech was ranked at the time. I think they were 25th when they beat Ohio State. I could be wrong, but I think they were ranked 25th. Do you know that by chance?
I don't have the rankings in front of me, honestly.
I believe going into that game they were ranked, or maybe right after. I don't know. I'm looking at the 2014 preseason, and it does not look like they were ranked at all. But they did receive 26 votes. But anyway, I think they're both sides of the argument, from my perspective, are valid. I think they're two valid ways to look at what happened in 2014. Now, my question to you, Drew, would be, if TCU were Oklahoma or Texas, would the conversation have been any different?
I think it might have been, from the media perspective, a little different because of the tradition at both Texas and Oklahoma. In the previous 7 years, Oklahoma has been ranked really high coming into the season, or they've been ranked really high at the end of the season. And I mean, Big Game Bob, Bob Stoops, hasn't really won the big games recently. So I think the narrative would have changed a little bit. I still think not having the conference championship game would have left out the Big 12. But I do agree with you in that it would have been a different conversation of, okay, well, they're Texas, and say Texas is, had the same record as TCU. Say you just flip-flop those teams, and had Texas lost to Baylor, and the same situation happens, I think Texas receives a little more of the media push But ultimately, I think that whoever that Big 12 team would have got left out no matter what.
So let me actually flip the scenario a little bit. Instead of looking at like an Oklahoma or Texas, which I agree with you, I think it was just interesting to me to know what the margin of error in the difference between TCU and Ohio State was. Like, how close was it to being TCU or Baylor? That makes a lot of difference, because if it was hairline and it had been Oklahoma or Texas on the same path, then I'm probably willing to say that Oklahoma or Texas would have made it. But if it was not really that close at all, like they knew that these were the four they wanted, I agree. I don't think there's really a whole lot that the name of the team did about it. But let me pose a different scenario to you. Let's say Ohio State loses that double overtime game to Penn State. That's still one loss, right? And arguably, that Penn State team is better than the Virginia Tech team.
Okay? Right, I agree.
So how does that then affect Ohio State in the college football playoff? Because was not a lot of the narrative on Ohio State this miraculous comeback season they had. And people can say that stuff like that doesn't play into it, but the NCAA as a whole knows how to make money. And the games that they're going to put on television are ultimately going to be the games they think are going to bring in the most money. So if Ohio State loses near the end as opposed to at the beginning, how much of a difference do you think that makes?
So you're saying that they beat Virginia Tech?
Yeah.
And then they lose to Penn State?
Yep.
That's interesting, because it was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 weeks later in the season, and that's interesting, man. I don't know. In my opinion, I don't think that would have changed much of anything, because you talked about earlier about the difference between Ohio State and TCU. Was it close? Was it a big margin? In my opinion, the margin was quite large. I think it was an absolute travesty that they put TCU and Baylor, above Ohio State heading into that last week, and then Ohio State jumped everybody. That was a joke from the College Football Playoff Selection Committee. They knew they were going to drop TCU and Baylor, and you set them up to fail. And that's my biggest gripe with this college football playoff, if I have one, is that they literally, those last 4 or 5 weeks, everybody knew that if Ohio State kept winning and if they won, they were getting in. So why would you continue to put TCU and Baylor and any combination of those three teams? Ohio State should have immediately jumped to 3 or 4. And then at the end of the season, when you had Ohio State beat Wisconsin, no matter the score, they would have stayed there and everybody would have been like, okay, that's fine. But no, instead you had to leapfrog 2 teams, and you put those fan bases, those student athletes, and everybody in those schools in a bad, bad situation.
I guess that's been my perspective all along, and I can remember putting this out on social media. Like, how can you tell me a team is ranked number 3, and then it goes out and destroys basically to the same level? Now, score-wise, all right, Iowa State is not nearly the type of opponent that Wisconsin was that week. Okay, I think we both agree on that one. Above and beyond, that Ohio State had a much more difficult matchup. But how are you going to say that the destruction the same week that Ohio State destroyed Wisconsin should have pushed TCU down to 6 from 3? Like, my whole perspective was, if that's what you're going to do, fine. Don't rank them at 3. Just don't have them in there. If you're not serious at that final point, if you never considered putting TCU and Baylor into the college football playoff, you should not have even had it. It should have just been the 4 that ended up going there. Did they think Wisconsin had a much better shot at beating Ohio State?
No, yeah, and I agree with that. And I think the biggest thing that I took away from when they had the Final Four announced on the 4-letter network, and they had the College Football Playoff Committee head, the guy that was making all the final decisions, and they had him on there. They asked him about that TCU. Why'd you rank him at number 3? And he said, because we wanted the whole body of work. Well, let me tell you something right now. The whole body of work, they lost to Baylor. on the field, and yet you still have TCU above Baylor. That if you have the whole body of work, it doesn't matter. And the fact of the matter is, the last week of the season, on December 6th, the Big 12 was out of sight, out of mind, because Baylor was playing Kansas State and TCU was playing Iowa State. Nobody cared.
All right. So
and now, what does the Big 12 do this year? The Big 12 does this year. They schedule Baylor, TCU, the final week of the season, December something.
November 27th.
Yeah. Okay. Second to the last week of the season. Because Baylor ends with Texas and TCU ends.
I think TCU
with Baylor.
ends with Baylor.
TCU ends with Baylor. Okay, so that's my thing. Like, you changed the schedule for this year because it screwed you last year.
Right. Like I said, the only way a Big 12 team is getting into the playoffs this year is if they have one of those two teams. And I don't mean to be disrespectful to the rest of the Big 12, but that's really what it's looking like. Okay. So one of those two teams.
Let's just say what it is. The rest of the Big 12 is bad.
It's hurt.
It's bad.
I mean, Oklahoma is. It could be, but like you said, over the last few years, they come into the season, and this is going to be the year for the rebound, and you end up with some weird loss that everybody's left scratching their head over. You know what I mean?
Yeah, every single year they lose to a team. Like last year, they lost to TCU, Kansas State, Baylor, Oklahoma State, and Clemson in the bowl game. They didn't lose like Clemson. They got embarrassed by Clemson.
I mean, it was awful.
40-6. And I think let me ask you this. How hot is Bob Stoops' seat right now? Is he on the hot seat?
You'd have to hope so, because like we've talked about in other podcasts, like if something isn't working and you're not willing to change it up, something's got to give. You either, as the coach, have to decide, my line's not working, my quarterback's not working, the way I use the distribution of my receivers, how my backs are in rotation. Or ultimately, if you're not able to put those things together and figure it out, the AD might have to say, this guy's got a great last name, but I'm sick of having high hopes, only to get them crushed 5 weeks into the season.
You know where Bob Stoops can go if he gets fired and or leaves Oklahoma? You know who would welcome him with open arms?
No.
His hometown of Youngstown State University. We'll have Bo Pelini as the head coach. Bob Stoops can be the defensive coordinator. Jim Tressel could be president, and they can all have dinners and talk strategy.
I like the sound of that. So let me ask you this. What does the Big 12 have to do in order to be taken seriously? I mean, ultimately, I think we know that the conference championship has to be there, but do they need to add some more teams? Who do they look at? What is your opinion on what you think they need to do?
You have to expand. You have to expand out west. And I say that because the SEC and the ACC have the East Coast on lockdown. And if you're the Big 12, you're not penetrating any further east than Texas. And fun fact, the SEC is coming west by including Texas A&M. So they have to go out west, and they have to get a look at a Boise State, a team I know you're high on. And you look at maybe other conferences from the Pac-12. You look at maybe a Utah, maybe a Colorado State. Maybe if they want to take the jump to the next level, if they think that.
So speaking of that, what if I threw out a real deal jumping to the next level situation?
Oh boy!
What about a team like North Dakota State? Is that too big of a jump?
Yeah, that's a little crazy. I mean, don't get me wrong. North Dakota State is a dynasty and a powerhouse right now. But to say that they compete in the Big 12 before all the, Big 12 and North Dakota State fans tweet at me at CFB Pros Drew that North Dakota State has upset Big 12 teams, but I don't think on a consistent basis that a North Dakota State or any FCS team can come up to the Power 5 conferences immediately and compete. I think if they went to the Mountain West, I think would be a good fit for them. I mean, you put them in there, and I think they can compete for a title next year. I really do.
I mean, from my perspective, just being completely honest with you, I look at the run of dominance that North Dakota State's been on. They obviously have good recruiting. That should only pick up if and when. I mean, it might just be a when at this point, to be honest with you. If and when they move up to the next level, you should expect that recruiting should only get better.
I'm going to disagree with you.
You really think so?
I'm going to disagree with you. I'm going to tell you why. In North Dakota, high school football is just there. We live in Ohio. It's not like Ohio. It's not like Texas, Florida, Oklahoma, California. It's not like that. Football is just football. Nobody. It's not as big as one would lead you to believe with North Dakota State being really good. If you move to the D1 level, and especially in the Mountain West, now these kids that are going to North Dakota State now are kids that were overlooked by Division I schools. They have a chip on their shoulder. And you talk about numerous podcasts that, the motivation factor, the chip on their shoulders. So these kids now are going to North Dakota State saying, you know what? I'm going to go to North Dakota State. I'm going to go win a title. And they have, for the past couple years, they've won titles. Now, if you move to the Division I level, you're recruiting against Colorado State. Now, instead of these kids going, well, I can go to North Dakota State, win championships. Now I can go to North Dakota State and get, maybe a Mountain West title, maybe win 5 games at the Division I level. I don't know. So instead of going to North Dakota State, hey, let's go to South Dakota State. They're still 1AA. Let's go to South Dakota. Let's go to Colorado. Let's go to Colorado State. You know what I mean? So the level, just because you move up, does not mean that the recruiting is going to pick up.
I think that's valid. I just always look at things from my perspective. If I was someone who was being recruited by, let's say, like a North Dakota State, a Boise State, et cetera, I'm going to probably pick the team. Titles aren't going to mean that much to me personally. I'm going to be looking at it from the perspective of what's going to give me the best opportunity for overall exposure. And that comes at the FBS level. It's just the bottom line. You could be the top dog of the FCS, but you're still not getting as much overall attention as the main college football that everybody pays attention to. That's why you don't see this much national attention on television when these guys play games. It's really restricted mostly to their home television channels. So you take that next step up and you have a good pedigree behind you where you're a school that's won titles, and nobody's expectation the first year is going to be that we're jumping up and we're going to win the title. That's really naive, though it did just work for Georgia Southern
in the Sun Belt, yeah.
But the Sun Belt and the Big 12 aren't going to be confused here. I'm just saying, it could revitalize the conference. I think sometimes what could be used in a business setting, because that's basically what I'm familiar with, is you inject something new, something exciting, something different, something that the people aren't used to. And if it works properly, you have that allure, that generation of excitement that now the attention is on us. And I'm not saying they're going to come in and they're going to challenge Baylor or TCU, but I think, and I'm probably wrong, it probably is a more natural step for them to take to, one of the group of 5 conferences that are a little bit smaller, that they could stand a chance in. But I'm just throwing out wild hypotheticals here. I think that it would be exciting, it would be interesting, and that could be some of what the Big 12 needs.
Oh, we can both agree they need to expand, whether that be a Boise, whether it be a Fresno, whether it be Utah. It doesn't matter. They need to expand, and I really do feel that they need to expand out west. Therefore, you can then go get not only broadcast rights of your bigger cities out west, but you can then go recruit California. If you get a team in California, a team from Arizona, maybe you can go out west and go, hey, I know you were in the Pac-12 at Utah, but now you're in the Big 12, and you can then go recruit Utah and Colorado and states like that. So your geographic footprint will become a lot bigger, not only for recruits but for money. So, and that's what matters, right? In college football, money.
That's it. There's very few places you're going to go where that's not the underlying theme.
Right.
So to start things off, let's hit the Big 12 where we kind of laid it out there. This is what we think they're going to have to do. It's not happening in 2015. It's going to have to happen in the years beyond. So we're just going to talk about 2015, and what a better place to start than with the Baylor Bears. In 2014, they had the 4th-ranked passing offense, the 29th-ranked rushing offense, and they were the best overall offense in the country. They had the 110th passing defense, the 16th-ranked rushing defense, the 51st-ranked overall defense. They scored the most points in the country with 48.2, and they allowed 25.5. And basically all they're losing this year is Bryce Petty, Anton Goodley, and Levi Norwood. Now, you're saying that you're losing your starting quarterback and 2 wide receivers, and it's just not a problem. How well do you have to recruit for that to not be a problem?
I mean, I give a lot of credit to Art Briles down there. He's done a great job recruiting, players that fit that system. And they return 8 starters on offense. I mean, with a team that, put up the most points per game in the Division I level, you return 8 guys on offense. That's pretty good. So, with Shock Linwood at running back, this is a guy that, okay, he's a running back, and you'd think, well, Baylor passes the ball. Yeah, but this guy, how many games last year did he have over, 100, 150 total yards, 4 or 5 touchdowns in a couple of these games? I mean, he's a really good running back, and I know you're high on Seth Russell. I'm iffy just on the sheer fact that he's a new quarterback coming in, but with the receivers of Katie Cannon, Jay Lee, these guys are, experienced veterans that can go out and they know how to catch 75 to 80, 90, 100 footballs in a year. So this offense, I see no reason can't put up 50 points a game this year.
First of all, how dare you not include Corey Coleman in your analysis?
I apologize to Corey Coleman and his family.
I'm going to tweet him. And I'm going to see if I can find his family, too, to be quite honest with you.
Maybe he'll tweet you back, but where would he want to tweet you back on? What's your Twitter handle?
I'm not telling you. Oh, at CFB Pros. Of course I want to let everyone know where we're located. We want a social media footprint out there.
I literally set you up with a softball and you bunted it. You were wide open in the end zone for a touchdown and you dropped the ball.
So how did you bunt me and it turned into a touchdown? You're all over the place with your analogies. So
I'm all fired up because you got me talking about expansion to Big 12 and all this stuff. And I'm all fired up.
You're gonna tell me you were lobbing me the ball for a spike. You had the high alley-oop off the glass. What is it next?
Well, the analogy that everybody knows is, you get lobbed a softball and you hit the softball. I mean, you didn't hit the softball, you bunted it.
That's fine. I'm 285, but I could run really fast. So, there. Maybe we're playing in a softball field and the bases are closer. You don't know. You don't know me.
I put that out there. That's true. I didn't put that out there. I didn't, preface this statement or analogy with anything. So you're right.
But really, I like Seth Russell. I find him to be a slightly more mobile version of Bryce Petty. And honestly, I think a lot of people forget that in 2013, Petty moved on his feet. Like, it was more restrictive last year, I think, where they didn't want him to do that. I think so. I think that because Russell started or played in 2 games. I know one was against SMU, if I'm not mistaken. So that's the only downside. The real tape that we have on Russell is against a D1 opponent or an FCS opponent.
We don't even know what division there are anymore. I mean, that's a sad part.
And SMU, which arguably could be a Division III opponent.
Wow.
But
SMU hate. All they hate sent at CFB Pros. Send it that way.
They were rough last year. Rough.
They're still recovering from the death penalty, and I cannot wait to talk about them because the death penalty is a big topic.
Yeah. So, I like Russell in terms of what he has to work with. I love Linwood. Like you said, he's able to get around and do so much. He's a versatile part of this offense, and Baylor had the 29th ranked rushing offense last year. This is a scary offense, but part of that reason is they put so many points on the board. At some point, like, you can run it a little bit, You can. The more you throw the ball, the more you're risking big plays where your receivers can get hurt. So while it's fun to put a bunch of points on the board, you have to kind of start to hit the brakes a little bit because you don't want to see these guys get hurt.
Yeah, especially when you're up, 70-6 on Northeastern State. Northwestern. Yeah, it is. I'm sorry, Northwestern State. Can't remember my handwriting. When you're up 70-6 on a, powerhouse like Northwestern State, you just want to run the ball. So
I think we both agree that these the numbers on offense, maybe the passing numbers go down a little bit, but the rushing numbers go up. I think overall, 45 to 50 points isn't unheard of in Baylor, and it's going to continue that way for quite some time.
Yeah, you look at Linwood last year; he went for 12, 52, and 16 touchdowns. They weren't a running team by any means, but those are good numbers for a lot of teams in the nation, especially for a team that spreads the ball out on offense. So I can see him going 14 with 15 touchdowns again. I really do. Maybe
Not
more.
out of the
Maybe more
question.
touchdowns. I mean, yeah, like you said, if they focus on the run early in the season, they get Seth Russell. You know, the one thing that really is exciting about this offense is they return every single one of their linemen. So, I mean, for Shock Linwood, that's got to be like, oh, yeah, please give me the ball all day.
Absolutely, but now let's move on to a team that really doesn't have the same.
Wait. Whoa, wait. We didn't talk about a Big 12 defense. Why did we skip over this?
Oh, do they play defense?
You don't want to talk about their defense? I mean, they have one of the most scariest defensive ends in the nation, and Sean Oakman.
Well, I read that
last
he's
year?
13 feet 5 inches.
God, he's huge.
Oh no, that's when the other guy's on him. I'm sorry.
That's yeah. No, I mean the defense is the defense. Just making light of it.
They are a good defense.
Oh, they are. I mean, Oakman had 11 sacks last year, so I mean that returns. He's a first round draft pick. I do firmly believe so.
They're definitely one of the best in the Big 12.
That's like
Exactly.
That's like saying you're a valedictorian of a homeschool. I mean, come on, man.
There you go. So now moving on to the valedictorian of the homeschool, we'll talk about Iowa State, who finished 2014 as the 51st ranked passing offense, the 108th ranked rushing offense, the 92nd ranked overall offense, the 7th worst passing defense, the 6th worst rushing defense, for the worst overall defense in the country. They scored 23.2 points, and they scored 38.8. And when I think about this team, I do not want to be offensive, but for the most part, they're a little bit of a mess.
I have no idea what this team is. The only thing I know about this team is offensive coordinator Mark Mangino was from the Youngstown, Mahoning Valley area, so Western PA area. So just another shout out to the Youngstown tradition of coaching and great talent that come out of here. So, but this offense, defense, special teams, everything struggle.
Yeah, Sam Richardson looks like he'll be, back to start. It's a second year in this offense. I think there's opportunity for improvement because it just wasn't very good last year. The running back situation looks like a split between Tyler Brown and Martinez Syria. Not really sure what's happening there, though they're going to be playing from behind enough that I don't think the running game is going to be a huge part of their options, to be quite frank and honest with you.
No, I mean, they run a three-wide system, so they're going to be throwing the ball a ton.
E.J. Bibbs is now with the Cleveland Browns. And off the subject, I actually think that that's a really, really good fit, but we don't really have a lot of time to spend talking about the NFL in our college football podcast. But just a quick stat, E.J. Bibbs scored 8 touchdowns last year. The returning receivers combined for 6. Right. I do like DeVario Montgomery and Alan Lazard. I think there is talent there. If the O-line holds up well enough and Richardson's doing his job, I think that these guys can have solid years.
Yeah, and you return Quentin Bundridge, who tore his ACL last year, so he's a guy coming back. He's a senior guy, so veteran leadership on the field is always a plus. But I agree, this team, offense, defense, they're just going to struggle. They went 0-9 in the Big 12 last year, and I see no reason why they shouldn't go 0-9 again.
The only reason I'm not going to disagree with you 100% because I haven't sat down and actually weighed out the matchups. I'm going to at some point, but I think there's been a decline in several teams to the point where they might actually not finish 0-9 in the Big 12. But I don't know what that's really saying overall.
I mean, I'm looking at their schedule right now, and it's just they play at Toledo, so that should maybe, I don't know, man. I think Toledo might beat them.
They play at Toledo. Toledo, who we think can potentially win the MAC, could probably beat Iowa State. I mean, I know that I did the MAC already.
Right.
I don't recall, but I didn't do that game yet because we didn't cover the Big 12. But, yeah, I don't know, man. It's tough sledding for me. Moving on to Kansas, the 86th ranked passing offense, the 112th ranked rushing offense, the 118th ranked overall offense, the 89th ranked passing defense, the 106th ranked rushing defense, the 109th ranked overall defense. They scored 17.8 points. They allowed 33.3. So they're basically giving up 2 more scores than they're scoring. And again, we come from Iowa State to Kansas, and this team as well seems to be a mess.
Yeah, they returned 3 starters on offense, 2 of them on the offensive line, and the other returning starter is the projected backup quarterback in Michael Cummings. So if he doesn't start, they're going to go with Montel Cozart and a new system with the air raid offense. So they're going to get some receivers involved. The returning running back only has last year he only had 631 yards, 5 touchdowns. So this team is going to struggle. They have a new head coach this year, so it's going to be a whole bunch of new stuff, and this team might finish 1-8.
You see what I'm saying? There's enough tough situations in the Big 12 that, depending where the game has been playing, a lot of these pieces almost become interchangeable.
Oh no, I agree with that statement, and Kansas, Iowa State, I don't know if they can compete right now in a conference such as the Mountain West or the Sun Belt.
Yeah, I mean,
I honestly, that's crazy to say that if you put Kansas in the Sun Belt, I might give them 4 or 5 wins. But I don't know. I mean, I'm just thinking out loud here. Like, that's a crazy thing to think about.
It's definitely possible. I mean, their starting quarterback situation is a mess. Cummings got hurt in the spring game.
Right.
So, I mean, and you'd have to think, regardless, he's probably on a really short leash. So if he doesn't do well, it's Cozart, but 80% of the receivers are gone. The running back was suspended in the spring. To my knowledge, he's questionable. I don't know if he's a full go for this year. If not, they've got DeAndre Bann and Keon Kinner. The defense, there looks like there are some potential improvements up front, but the defensive backs are losing their starters. They're losing their starters. And that was the part of the defense that was the best. I mean, it's tough. It's really tough. I mean, I don't envy the position that team is going to be in.
No, I don't either. I think I hate to say this, but it's going to be a serious struggle. And the cupboard is empty, as they would say when you walk into a new team like this. Head coach David Beatty, hope I'm pronouncing that right, is walking into, and the cupboard is bare, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll move on to another team whose offensive cupboard, comes up bare after their starting quarterback and their top 2,000-yard receivers are gone, and Kansas State, who had the 17th-ranked passing offense, 104th-ranked rushing offense, the 50th overall offense, the 65th passing defense, the 33rd rushing defense, the 41st overall defense. They scored 35.8. They allowed 23.2, but I don't think that they can sustain that 35.8 points.
No, you lost so much from last year, and their projected quarterback, as what I'm reading right now, is Joe Huebner.
Yeah,
he has never started a college football game at quarterback, nor has he started a football game ever at quarterback. He walked on at K-State as a athlete, and he played other positions in high school and at K-State. So, if not him, it's going to be Jesse Ertz. I don't know if this Bill Snyder team can do what they did last year, but I'm excited because I like Bill Snyder, and you can never count on a Bill Snyder coach team. So, I mean, we might be sitting here at the end of the season going, wow, man, K-State, well, they're good.
It's certainly possible. Quarterback is a real big cluster because there's also a JUCO transfer and a freshman that the coach is high on, so it's going to be tough. Charles Jones has the potential to be – he's basically the only returning offensive playmaker from 2014, so you'd have to think while they're figuring things out that the emphasis is going to be on him. I think this defense is where it's at. I think this is still a top 30 overall defense. And look, 23.2 points is not a lot of points to score, period. You know what I mean? Like, you might have scored 35.8 last year. That's not happening, but it's not out of the question with the type of offense that's run here that you could score 25 points, 26 points, and still win enough of your games to be relevant.
Yeah, for me, it starts up on the D line. With Jordan Willis, 4.5 sacks last year. Yeah, he's a guy that can really dominate and change the tempo of a game. So the D line is good enough to let that defensive backfield and let those linebackers run free and make plays. But again, it's Bill Snyder. His teams are always well trained, they're well disciplined, and they do the fundamentals extremely well.
Moving on to our final team of the day, we will stop with Oklahoma, who had the 85th ranked passing offense, the 11th ranked rushing offense, the 24th overall offense, the 9th worst passing defense, the 8th best rushing defense, the 52nd overall defense. They scored 36.4 and they allowed 25.9. Where do you see this team going in 2015?
Nowhere if the quarterback position isn't settled. This team has too much talent with Samar J. Perrine, Joe Mixon in the backfield, and the outside with Sterling Shepard. This team has talent and NFL talent all over the place, but the quarterback position with Baker Mayfield, a Texas Tech transfer, or Trevor Knight, who started last year for Oklahoma, it's unsettled. Bob Stoops has got to figure it out and figure it out quick. Personally, I start Baker Mayfield if he's healthy and if everything is what it seems like it is. So that's just my opinion. But man, this team is too talented to only win 8 games last year. They went 5-4 in the Big 12. That can't happen.
100% on board. I like Mayfield to start. Look, Trevor Knight had some really strong moments. He had one huge game I just happened to be on the lucky end of catching last year. The offensive line loses 144 starts.
Yeah, they only returned their starting center from last year. So
that's a good position to return.
No, it absolutely is. But
the problem is it's going to be hard if there isn't that synchronicity, if they are not clicking. You can't let P. Ryan get started. If you lose that element of P. Ryan being able to control the ball, you kind of can't get the passing game going. They're going to know how to kind of isolate this team on defense. I think that the defense is good. They're not going to let teams score a lot of points. Ultimately, we just have to hope. And I think for a program like Oklahoma, the recruiting should be strong enough that the offensive line shouldn't be as much of an issue as we're making it out to be. But there's no guarantee it's going to start off fluidly.
No, and on the defensive side of the ball, I just want to point out one thing real fast. Probably the coolest and most badass name for any linebacker or any defensive player in the nation, senior linebacker Eric Stryker. That's perfect. He plays the perfect position for that name.
Was he a Mortal Kombat character?
Yeah, I mean there was a Stryker in Mortal Kombat. It was spelled STY, but yeah, I mean it's close. But yeah, it might be relative. Who knows?
Well, absolutely, and we'll be back tomorrow with the coverage on the remaining 5 teams and some more conversation in regards to the Big 12. Drew, if anyone wants to discuss what they heard on the podcast today, where can they find you?
I'm fired up, and you can always find me on Twitter at CFB Pros Drew. And if they want to fire you up on Twitter, where can they find you?
They can find me at CFB Pros on Twitter, College Football Pros on Facebook, and www.cfbpros.com on the internet. Thanks for joining us, and we will finish up the Big 12 with you tomorrow.